One of the cornerstones of American justice is trial by jury. But what happens when that jury is in Florida? Let's find out. Sometimes the criminal justice system,
It was more like guilty until proven innocent.
isn't all that just. Which stage of sleepwalking involves murder? That's scary.
Of course it is.
You don't give up, do you?
I'm Jena Friedman, and this is Indefensible. The story you are about to hear is a complicated one. It involves a suspicious death, a man who not only didn't report it, but who stayed with the body for 1 to 3 days after, and a shocking defense that enabled the accused to walk free. So what happened? Let's start from the beginning. October 28th, 2015, 4:15 p.m. A detective at the Margate Police Department in Florida gets an unusual phone call from criminal defense attorney Ken Padowitz, and it goes something like this.
Here's an address. There's a dead body here. I'm saying nothing else.
Former homicide detective Jim Rathman. Okay, so typically defense attorneys don't cold call police departments saying, there's a body here, you do the rest?
The only reason why a criminal defense attorney should be involved is either A, they know the deceased, or somebody thinks they're in a lot of trouble.
When police arrive, they find 60-year-old Francisca Martinez dead in her guest bedroom. The scene leaves more questions than answers. Police talk to a neighbor who tells them that earlier that day, she had dropped by to check on Francisca. Francisca's boyfriend, Rick Patterson, answered the door.
And because of the language barrier between the two, one speaking English, the other only knowing Spanish, he gave the hand signal as if she's sleeping.
He was at the crime scene and said that the woman was sleeping when she had already been dead.
Correct.
Okay, that's just creepy. Investigators determined the victim's body had been decomposing for as long as 3 days. Naturally, police go looking for Patterson. They finally locate him in a hospital psych ward, where his attorney had him admitted for a 72-hour observation. When police try to question him, he just hands them the business card of his lawyer, Ken Padowitz. Meanwhile, Francisca's body is too badly decomposed to yield clues about her death, and an autopsy is inconclusive. I wanted to learn more about Francisca Martinez, the person. So I met with her granddaughter, Ashley Andrade.
This one is just of me and her. So she was
so
always taking care of me, always babysitting me.
Look at your pigtails. Oh my goodness.
This is another picture of us together.
Smile.
She would dress me like a doll. This is like a velvet dress that I had, and she was just an amazing woman. She moved from Ecuador to America when my dad was like, I think about 4 years old or so. And she was majoring in accounting, and she graduated from college. She had a great job in Manhattan, and everything was, on her own. So she, just tried her best to make her kids have the best life as possible.
So how did Francisca end up in Fort Lauderdale?
So when she retired, her ideal situation was to move to Florida, get her own place, which she did. And it kind of makes me a little upset because she hadn't even settled completely in Florida. Like there was so much more for her, so much life left to her. It doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, I'm gonna cry a little bit.
No. It's okay.
Thank you so much.
No.
But she was a woman that cared so much about her health, so much about everything that she was doing that it just didn't make sense that she just sporadically passed away. Yeah. I remember I was a junior in high school. I was Googling things like sleep apnea, things like that. Like, is that something that people just pass away in their sleep?
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to tell me what happened.
What are some reasons that his guilt is so firm in your mind?
He stayed in that house for a few days with a decomposing corpse, and all of that is just like so hard to understand. Like, and if you genuinely think that that was an accident and you really, didn't mean to do that, why wouldn't you call the police? Why wouldn't you try to save someone?
The police think they know the answer to that question. They believe Patterson didn't call them because he strangled Francisca to death. He sent troubling texts like, "Your dad did something really bad last night." And according to one acquaintance of Patterson's, he told her, quote, "I choked her. I choked Francisca." Once he's released from the psych ward, that same acquaintance is so convinced of his guilt, she wears a wire in effort to capture his confession.
I know it's I caused it. You don't think I have a hard time doing this? I mean, I'm torn. I'm a wreck. I'm going to go to jail. It's a matter of time. What did you do? Go crazy? No, it doesn't matter what I did. It doesn't matter what I did.
While Patterson doesn't confess outright, police believe they have enough on him. On November 4th, a week after Francisca's body is found, Rick Patterson is arrested and charged with second-degree murder. It's hard as we're launching into talking about the case. It's just like there's like this awful like sheen over it because of the defense. Like the thing in the defense just makes it this punchline when you're really talking about a person.
Because it's not who she was, but from an outsider looking in, that's, you know, the tragedy that was her end. So that's what people think about when they think about her.
So what was the defense that ultimately got Patterson off? Brace yourselves.
The trial of a South Florida man accused of killing his girlfriend continued today, and so far no ruling on if he'll be able to show his penis to the jury.
What you're about to see is real news coverage of an actual legal defense. And what's even more shocking, it worked.
Patterson says what happened was an accident.
Patterson insists Martinez choked to death during oral sex.
The death is consistent with being accidentally sexually asphyxiated during oral sex.
And the defense says that their client did not call 911 the night that he claims all of this happened because he was embarrassed about the whole thing.
Aw, poor guy. This unorthodox defense raises a lot of questions. We talked to medical examiner Dr. Leon Kelly to learn more. Do you think from your medical expertise, do you think it's actually possible to suffocate on a dick?
Not consensually, it's not. Once they go unconscious, if you let go, 99.9% of people are going to wake right up without any adverse consequences.
After a few days of decomposition, is it really hard to determine cause of death?
Something that has soft findings like a strangulation or a smothering, it can be, even in ideal circumstances, very difficult to determine cause of death.
How do you prove strangulation then if there is a case where maybe the body's decomposed for a couple days and there aren't signs of it on the body?
Those are some of the toughest cases we have. There's nothing in this autopsy that any forensic pathologist can point to and go, aha, that's the cause of death right there. That's the key.
How do we make this interview not come across as a tutorial for aspiring murderers who want to be able to get away with it?
It's almost impossible.
As absurd as the "I thought she choked on my dick" defense sounds, similar defenses aren't entirely uncommon. They're known as the consent defense, or rough sex defense, or even more cringe-inducing, the 50 Shades of Grey defense. Since the 1980s, this defense has been used countless times, and it often results in reduced sentencing for the defendant.
Robert Chambers claimed he accidentally killed Jennifer Levin during a moment of rough sex she initiated. The prosecution said the killing was deliberate, but the jury could not come up with a verdict. A plea bargain was struck.
In fact, the rough sex defense is so widespread and sadly so effective, it was recently banned in the UK. Former police sergeant and consent defense expert Joanne Archambault explains why these defenses work.
When it comes to intimate crimes like this, sexual assault cases, I believe it is about gender because you don't see the same types of tactics being used with other crimes. You don't see it with robbery, you don't see it with burglary.
That house was asking for it.
Why are the tables flipped here? I mean, a woman delays reporting and she's not believed. Here you got a person who dies and you wait 3 days and you call a defense attorney.
Is the result of this case a function of the incredible skill of the defense attorney or just the fact that he works in Florida?
It doesn't take a huge amount of intelligence, I gotta be honest with you. Everyone knows, it doesn't matter how heinous the injuries, that the only way to go in a sex crime is a consent defense. And then you attack the victim. That's what you do, that's what works.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist.
No, hell no.
So putting sex on top of what could just be a run-of-the-mill homicide is actually a great strategy if you're a defense attorney. Because what you're doing is you're leveraging a culture that doesn't believe women to help get your client off.
Yeah, and until we change the culture, we're not going to consider this to be as important as the typical homicide, not your homicide.
I would appreciate you not calling it my homicide.
This case, this homicide.
Sounds pretty simple. All we have to do to make it easier for men who commit violent acts against women and marginalized people to be prosecuted is change the culture around how we understand victims.
How we understand and how we believe women, because first they have to report, and women don't report because they know they're not going to be believed, or they're going to be destroyed in the process.
Or they're dead.
Or they're going to be destroyed, which sometimes can be worse than being dead. At least when you're dead, you're not feeling pain. These victims live a life of trauma.
Well, you're cheery today.
I know. Sorry, but it's true.
And why would women think they'd be believed with verdicts like this?
The defendant is not guilty.
Jurors declared Richard Patterson a free man following a rough sex defense.
After they said not guilty, our family was screaming in like the court area, you know, like, this is insane. Of course he's guilty. Like, no one can say that he's not guilty. This is an open and shut case. For them to come back in a few hours with a verdict, I thought was insane.
How long was the trial?
It was about 2 to 3 days. I remember
the entire trial?
Yeah. And I just remember his lawyer, Padowitz, I think his name is, for lack of a better word, he was an asshole. They could have made their case by saying there's lack of evidence. There's no way you can prove this, you know? But instead they wanted to demean who she was, dehumanize who she was, and then parade her around the courtroom like she was this whore, and this was just something that she brought upon herself. They brought in, like, you know, evidence of, like, oh, she had, like, an adult toy. For that to be able to be presented, and then for his entire rap sheet of whatever domestic violence restraining orders he had had prior, for that to not be brought in, it's just, it doesn't make sense.
Yes, you heard that right. Francisca's purchasing history was put on display, but the alleged killer's history of domestic abuse was not. And that was the judge's decision. As in all criminal trials, it's up to the judge to determine what evidence is admissible in court. And since the victim isn't the person who's actually on trial, they have fewer protections under the law.
And that, I think, speaks to what's wrong with the law and what's wrong with what people can and cannot do in courtrooms. You took a woman and you degraded her in front of everyone. Like, she was nothing.
I'm just angry. I don't have any questions. I'm just really angry.
No, that's okay.
So angry, I wanted to talk to the choke on a dick defense lawyer myself.
He's here.
So who is the face behind the dick defense? Meet attorney Ken Padowitz.
I think what makes me a good trial attorney is I'm able to take off my lawyer skin and place myself in the jury box and peer out from that box as any juror.
Your lawyer skin comes off and there's human underneath.
I'm a person. I have emotions.
Are you embarrassed to be known as the choke on a dick lawyer guy?
I'm okay. However anybody wants to think of me, of course I'm a human being and I want to be thought of in a positive light.
It seems impossible to suffocate that way. How would somebody think that they killed someone that way?
I don't have to come up with that answer. The only answer I have to ask is, did my client, Mr. Patterson, think that? And the answer was yes. And then the next question I need to ask myself is there any way that I can communicate what Mr. Patterson thought to a jury and actually have them believe that Mr. Patterson believed that?
It's not about choking on a D. It's about convincing a jury that someone thought their partner choked on their D.
Exactly.
And what was that strategy?
If you're a good trial lawyer, you're going to create various options that you can elect to use or not use during your trial. In my case, in this case here, I elected to do a motion before the judge to do what's called a jury view.
What is a jury view as it pertains to this case?
So a jury view in this case was specifically to have my client potentially expose himself to the jury, to have the jury be able to see my client's penis, be able to take that into account and determine how much weight they thought that evidence or information was.
Have you ever Me Too'd a courtroom before?
I'm sorry?
Have you ever filed a motion to show a client's penis to unwilling viewers before?
No, this case is very unique. So how would I take potentially the murder weapon and
his penis
and not potentially give myself as a lawyer the option of presenting that to the jury in some form?
Okay, cool. But one question remains. Do you think it's possible for someone to choke on a dick?
I believe that my client believed it.
Have you ever sucked a dick?
Well, I don't know if my sexual behaviors and past behavior is relevant here, so I decline to answer that question.
I don't mean to slut shame you. That's the defense attorney's job.
I think you're mocking defense attorneys.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I prefer not to be mocked, but if you have an opinion different than what I'd like, I can live with that.
Because you're alive, unlike Francisco.
Listen, you're.
So how did such an absurd defense in such a seemingly open and shut case work? One of Florida's leading defense attorneys reveals the answer. At the end of the day, Padowitz just did what he was hired to do, and he did it well. But I still had some questions and a weirdly high tolerance for talking to defense attorneys. So to weigh in on this bizarre defense, and more importantly, why the jury bought it, I enlisted Orlando-based defense attorney Mark Nijame.
Think of how excellent that defense was.
Is it excellent or is it
I'll tell you why it's excellent. No,
easy?
I'll tell you why it's excellent. Because he had to explain why his client said what he said to those two witnesses. It was the elephant in the room. The client made the statements.
The client said, I choked her.
I choked her and I did something I regret, which were damning statements. And he had to explain them. How else could he explain them?
There's no way he thought that she choked on his dick.
You don't know that. And obviously, the jury thought that what was presented had enough doubt that they acquitted him.
Could the defense attorney ever actually make up that defense to try to exonerate his client and justify very incriminating text such as, I choked her?
He can pose hypotheticals to the jury that shows that the state didn't prove what they were alleging. Because all this comes back to what the state alleged. The state alleged that she died of strangulation and asphyxiation, period. They had to prove it.
So no one mentions a dick until Padowitz comes on the scene, which is also a pun. I'm sorry. I can't help it. Our national obsession with dicks.
Can you move your hands in a different way when you're talking about dicks, please? Thank you.
It seems like a good defense attorney would probably try to insert a penis into any case they could.
Well, a lot of people will try to screw whatever they can. In this case,
Lady Justice.
That's not what happened here. What happened is...
Lady Justice is getting by our national penis obsession. Maybe the only real takeaway from this tragic case is that in a nation as obsessed with doubting women as it is with dicks, justice doesn't always prevail. Do you have any hope that the culture can change?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we've made some humongous changes in society. Smoking, drinking, driving. So I know we can do it when we think women's lives are worth it.
So in a couple centuries, when Florida's clearly underwater, we might have some semblance of justice for women.
Yeah.